to comment on the guiding principles. And the work that I'm going to discuss, it was largely done through the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center at Harvard, which is a multi-stakeholder group study center looking at clinical trial infrastructure with a particular attention in the developing world that I run with Mark Barnes, from whom you will hear tomorrow. I have no personal relevant financial relationships. MRCT is a multi-stakeholder group that receives support from many pharmaceutical, CRO, independent IRBs, not-for-profit organizations. So the 4 principles that you outlined were respect for individual participants whose data are shared, maximizing the benefits to participants in clinical trials and to society while minimizing harm, increasing public trust, and carrying out sharing of data in a manner that addresses fairness, or respect for persons, beneficence, justice, which is fairness, and it really does sound like the Belmont principles, to which one adds public trust. Independently, MRCT was doing work on data sharing, and we came up with the following core principles, which you'll see are very, very similar to the criteria that you shared: protect research participants, advance innovation in public health, balance risks with benefits, treat all generators equally. In other words, there's nothing special about pharma versus academics versus foundations, and the expectations should be shared. I'll return to that in a second. To make the data disclosure practicable by avoiding undue burdens on both data generators and requesters, timely access, transparency, and accountability. What I would add there is that, you know, I think that the details are important. And while the 4 principles are terrific and no one would argue, application of those is absolutely critical, and guidance around that. And the practicability, transparency, and accountability is really important. And I would say also that the principles should live in a global application so that they can apply to all countries. The last thing we need is every country having a different set of guiding principles when we do many multinational trials. All data generators, as I mentioned, all data requesters, and all data holders. So the data sharing should apply equally to all study sponsors and data generators and to all data holders. You know, I was just talking about this at the break. I am more concerned about the data generators that are academics than I am about, you know, industry-sponsored trials that are validated by CROs that have a degree of oversight that at least, you know, and I say this as a loving institutional official, at least from the data that I've seen. I do think something beyond a purely voluntary regime is desirable if we're going to create a level playing field, or you will never see voluntariness from the academic institutions, certainly. There should be standard formats for clinical trial data and documents, common definitions and metadata, and the ability to combine data sets. You know, we have to make sure that when people are looking at this data, they're working with apples to apples. And right now, that's not true. So people have very different ways of defining the data, of uploading the data, of curating the data, and the data dictionaries, et cetera. The metadata is something very important. I do think that while we're now sitting with, you know, a number of different platforms, that we're going to lose something ultimately by not being able to combine data sets, and that we should, over time, hopefully work that out. The rationales and benefits propose that the initial and reanalysis will reflect sound science. We've talked about that this morning. And data sharing should be practical and transparent. Many of the rationales or benefits require participant-level data sets, not summary data sets, if they're really going to be valuable. And that does facilitate the secondary analysis to verify results, regulatory decisions, and public policy. I don't envy the regulatory bodies who are going to have to review all the science that comes out of these secondary analyses. I do think this will improve safety surveillance, speed new discoveries, as we talked about. For a data sharing system, adequate scientific expertise among the analytical team and providing the technical support sufficient to permit the uses. So we talked about the infrastructure. We didn't talk about the human resource needs of using that data once it's uploaded onto a server. And then the timing should be some certain, such as a year after the primary study completion, but at least a given time to say. So operating principles, potentially requests and decisions on the web, pre-commit to an analytic plan. We talked about this earlier today. The requester's identity and scientific plan are publicly disclosed. And a data use agreement. I think the EMA has some excellent suggestions for elements to be included. And the decisions include both data generator and other parties. I will say that I want to spend a couple of minutes on the informed consent and de-identification issues, in part because if one of the principles is improving public trust, all we need is a few significant errors to really undermine that trust. And I think that we should attend to thinking about the patient permissions and how we approach that. And in contrast to Susan, I think that these compound consents are problematic for a number of different reasons, which we can talk about, amongst which, if you have compound consents from a pharma company, then the data that's uploaded will not be a complete data set. So you can never do a secondary analysis or a confirmation analysis on that. Second of all, you do, if you say you must consent, then you have compound consents, which are very problematic because the potential beneficial attributes of a trial will be denied if the participant doesn't agree. I do think also that the methods of de-identification do not protect for confidentiality, so that having some granularity to what kind of data we're talking about, whether we're talking about malaria genotypes or HIV, is very important and was lost this earlier today because we never really dissected what kind, the risk base of the data that is being shared. Removing HIP identifiers, and I can say that while we talk about HIP identifiers, transnationally, they do not have safe harbors for 18 identifiers, and the frameworks across the countries that we deal with are very different. And de-identification is a moving target. As you increase technology and change technology and pool data sets, you increase the likelihood of re-identification. And the degree of de-identification is inversely related to data usefulness. The more identifiers that are removed, the less useful the data becomes to subsequent researchers. And I do think we need to acknowledge the risks and layer that with system design. For retrospective versus prospective consent, I'll be 2 seconds, or 3. I think that the informed consent document that a patient or a participant is signed is de facto a contract with that participant, and that to assume that that is going to be something that we can abrogate as a class is problematic. And that if it's not clear, then ethics committees or IRB should make that call, not data generators. And if the regulations in some countries, as EMA they may, require data sharing and are inconsistent with the informed consent form, then the data generators should not be liable for breach of contract or failure to comply. I think we should look at prospective consent and figure out common consents so that we don't have an array of different sort of permission slips, and compound consent should be avoided. So, and that just summarizes what I said. Thank you.